Now I'm very happy to present to you a candidate for the Republican nomination for Virginia's Lieutenant Governor, Jeannemarie Davis from Arlington. Glad to have you, Jeannemarie.
I'm going to make one little correction. Well, I grew up in Arlington, but Fairfax.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. It's really terrific to be here with you. I have to say that I have driven up and down this road a zillion times, A, because I am a graduate of UVA, and B, because my third daughter and my fourth daughters are graduates of UVA. And my youngest daughter was on the dance team, so I went to UVA almost nightly, it seemed like, to attend all the basketball games and all the home football games to watch her dance. And so I think that part of Route 29 should be dedicated to me, since I've spent 2/3 of my life on this road. Driving back and forth through.
If you get the bypass bill,
well, I have to tell you, I supported that in the legislature, and we just haven't made much progress on it, but I'm good with that. Thank you so much for having me today, and I want to just tell you a little bit about myself first, because I know that almost none of you, I think, know me or have we met before. I grew up in an Air Force family. My father was a civilian with the Air Force, and we moved to Arlington when I was in the 5th grade and in my 5th school. Graduated, as I told you, from the University of Virginia, have a degree in mathematics. And so I'm very analytical and very much a problem solver, which is how I always approached anything that came before me for consideration when I was in the legislature. I have 4 daughters who are 24 to 34, so they're all grown, and 2 live on the West Coast, and all self-supporting, I'm happy to say. And so this has really freed me up to be able to run statewide and to run for lieutenant governor, and I'm just in a really good point in my life with all of that. My third daughter, Cassie, is an Air Force officer, and I like to share with people one of the most compelling things that's happened to me as a mom. She was in the ROTC program at UVA. She commissioned the day before she graduated, and she was home for a holiday. We were at the dinner table, and we were talking about her future career in the Air Force. And she looked at me and said something that's very hard for a mother to hear, but gave me great pride. She said, "Mom, I'm willing to die for my country." And I just thought, no, that's not something a mom wants to hear, but I was just so proud that I had raised my daughter to love their country so much that she wanted to serve her country in that capacity. So I'm very proud of what she's doing. I'm proud of all my daughters, but especially of that. I stayed at home and raised the girls for 19 years and was the volunteer for everything. I was a Girl Scout service unit manager and a Girl Scout leader and the PTA mom and all of that. And when my youngest daughter went to 1st grade, I thought, I want to get involved in volunteering with the Republican Party. And so I wrote a letter to my Republican committee chair. It was pre-internet days. Got no response. And was in the library at my daughter's school volunteering, and another mom was there, and her husband came in, and they started talking about this campaign that was coming up in 1993, and how they were going to volunteer. So I walked up to them and said, "What party are you affiliated with?" And they said, "We're Republicans." And I said, "Yes, I have finally found a way to volunteer for the Republican Party," because I wasn't getting a response from my party chair. Next thing I knew, I was standing in the freezing cold in front of Wolf Trap Elementary School, passing out literature on Election Day for the Alan Ferris Gilmore ticket. And that's how I got my start. I decided that I wanted to be more involved, so I became the magisterial district chairperson for the Providence District, one of our magisterial districts in Fairfax County, the most Democrat magisterial district in Fairfax County at the time. And we would go out every Saturday canvassing, as I know all of you do, knocking on doors, looking for those 2 or 3 Republicans that I just knew lived in every one of those precincts. And we found them, and we did fine. In 1997, I ran for the House of Delegates and won that election, and represented the Vienna, Oakton, Fairfax City area for 6 years, for 3 terms. And in my 3rd term, I was elected the majority whip, and had the distinction of being the only Republican woman in the history of the General Assembly to ever be elected into a top leadership position, which holds today. It tells us that we have a little more work to do on the gal side of things, but really enjoyed serving in leadership. And then I moved to the state senate, and I represented the state senate, that same area and a little broader area, for 4 years, where I chaired the rules subcommittee. I want to tell you a little bit about my work in the legislature before I move on to my next responsibility, serving in Governor McDonald's cabinet. I was always on the Privileges and Elections Committee, and so election law became very important to me. I was the chief patron of the first voter ID bill that passed in 2000. We tried to get it through before, but the Democrats just wouldn't vote for it, and it was 50-50 in the House for my first term in the House. I always wanted to just hang a little sign around the Democrats' necks that said, "I support voter fraud." I never could understand why they wouldn't support it, and they don't to this day. But we were able to get that bill passed in 2000, and I'm really thrilled that we now have a photo ID bill. I think that's critical. It's not something we could get done back in 2000 with such a close vote in the House and the Senate, but I think we've come a long way now, and I think that's imperative. One of the other things that I did is I chaired a joint subcommittee that studied the electronic voting machines. We call those the DREs, the ones with the touch screen. They do not have a voter-verified paper trail, and it bothered the heck out of me that folks were voting on these machines and it was recording votes the way it thought it should. But I was hearing so many stories about folks that would say, you know, when the screen came up for it comes up and tells you who it thinks you voted for, and then you press vote, it's wrong. And I kept hearing that over and over. So I created a joint subcommittee and chaired it. We studied those machines for a year. We had a lot of meetings, and at the end we determined that we couldn't count on them to be accurate. And because it wasn't a verified voter paper trail where the voter actually saw that scroll of paper and knew that it was recording the votes precisely, that we needed to move to a different system. And so I carried legislation to replace them all with a Scantron, so you're filling out that paper ballot that goes right through that Scantron machine. But what I like about that is it is a paper ballot, and if there is a recount, they can count those paper ballots. Because of the prohibitive cost of replacing every DRE at the same time, the legislation that I carried and passed simply states that as these electronic machines break and cannot be fixed, they can't replace them. They have to replace it with a Scantron. So over time, we will move completely to paper ballots in Virginia, and then we will be able to accurately count the outcome of every single election and not have to worry about whether machines are recording the right way or not. The other issue that I'm very concerned about, and I think this was addressed in not completely, but in large part, is voter registration. You know, if you show a voter ID and you're in the poll book, you get to vote, and that's legal and legitimate. The question is, should you have been in the poll books to begin with? And I'm very nervous that, and actually, the Commonwealth's attorney in the city of Richmond, I think 2 elections ago, actually prosecuted an individual who had been getting folks to file to register to vote, and they would say, I'm a convicted felon, I can't vote, and they would lie to them and say, oh, they changed the law in Virginia, you can vote. And they fill out the voter registration form and sign it and turn it in, and this person was caught and was prosecuted and convicted. So we know that sort of thing is happening, and it's always bothered me that we really haven't focused too much on the registration part of it to make sure that only eligible voters are registered to begin with. Because once you're registered, even if you have that photo ID, you can still vote. So I've done a lot of work in election law because I think that that is the most fundamental thing that we do as citizens. And if our elections are flawed and we have people voting who shouldn't, or we have voter fraud, then we don't, then as a republic who elects their elected officials, it's a flawed system, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that it isn't. So I've done a lot of work in that area. After I left the state Senate, during the time I was in the Senate and the 2 years that after I was out of the Senate, I was a partner in a small technology consulting firm. The technology community is really what I have worked in and is what I am a part of in Northern Virginia. And then when Governor McDonnell was elected, he asked me to serve in his cabinet. And he asked me to serve as the director of his Washington office. So for the past 3 years, I have been engaging in our federal relations, working on behalf of the governor and the Commonwealth on everything that's been going on in Washington. And sometimes people will ask, why are you running for lieutenant governor? And I like to say, well, if you spent the last 3 years watching the Obama administration in action, you too would be incentivized to run for public office. And I think everyone's very aware of a lot of what's going on in Washington, but I'll tell you, I know the minutia, and it's really frightening to me exactly what's happening. From a state's perspective, watching the Obama administration through the regulatory and the executive order process, bypassing Congress, I have become a very strong states' rights advocate. I've always, of course, supported the 10th Amendment, but I really understand with great clarity how important that is now. And I'd like to give you a few examples of some of the things I've worked on in the governor's office. One of them is education. The Elementary Secondary Education Act, ESEA, is up for reauthorization. It has been for a couple of years now. The House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, the committee staff have had a hard time coming to agreement, clearly because they are both run by 2 different parties. And the Obama administration very clearly wants for the feds to determine what will be taught and how it will be taught in our schools. And what they're utilizing is called the Common Core Standards. The Race to the Top grant program that Obama is so fond of and unfortunately had billions of dollars appropriated by Congress to him for this program is a perfect example. For the Race to the Top program, states applied for grant money, and it was billions of dollars. And part of the grant application required that you bring in the Common Core standards, which is in essence telling your state what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it. And in our opinion in Virginia, it dumps down the standards that we have in Virginia. Now we're looking at how we're not competing well with the rest of the world in educational outcomes, and we want to dumb down our standards. Tim Kaine had started the process to apply for Race to the Top grant, and Governor McDonald came in, and we talked about the Common Core, and he said, I can't embrace that. And so, in essence, Virginia could not apply for a grant. Well, what I saw was billions of education dollars in through this Race to the Top grant program being awarded to states, mostly with Democrat governors. And so our hard-earned taxpayer dollars that we contribute in our income tax to the federal government, instead of us receiving the dollars that we should, by formula at least, in Virginia, being sent to these other states, mostly with Democrat governors. And then the Obama administration decided that they wanted to add a Race to the Top early education program for birth to age 5. Through kindergarten when the other Race to the Top program began, and I'm still trying to figure out why we need to indoctrinate our newborn children and why it's birth to age 5, but that's what it is. I think they wanted to get into all the child care and preschool and all of that. Well, they awarded 10 Race to the Top grants, 9 of them to Democrat governor-led states, 1 to a Republican governor-led state. And so all I have watched when the Obama administration is giving dollars to distribute, they distribute them to Democrat-led states in large part. And so I've been watching our tax dollars just be, we talk about the redistribution of wealth and the fact that they're taxing more and more from those who are working and giving more and more to those who aren't. Well, I'm seeing that same type of distribution work as the Obama administration has been given permission to redistribute funds from one state to the other. And it's very discouraging. Workforce Reinvestment Act is another that's up for reauthorization, and that's important because it's the workforce dollars that the states are given by the federal government for workforce training and redevelopment. We have a lot of unemployment in our rural areas in Virginia. Virginia's unemployment rate is just below 5.5%. It's one of the lowest in the country, but that's because there's practically no unemployment in our largely populated areas of Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads, although that's probably about to change with the sequester. But in our rural areas, we have 20% unemployment, even a little bit higher than that, in places like Martinsville and certainly out in Southwest Virginia, particularly with what's going on in the coal industry. And so 15% of those workforce dollars have been given to governors to use in a discretionary manner. They've been very innovative in creating programs that provide training for those that are unemployed. And the Obama administration wanted to grab 2/3 of those dollars to put into what? A discretionary fund, so he could dole it out the way he wanted to. When I left the governor's office on September 7th, I left on September 7th so I could campaign full-time. The state is huge, and it really is a full-time effort. We had negotiated half of that back. But the Obama administration is grabbing as many dollars as they can that are distributed to states, so that instead of allowing those dollars to be distributed in a formula-driven manner, so every state is at least getting what they're putting in proportionally, they're trying to get dollars and put them into discretionary funds so he can send them to his friends and ignore those that were Republican-led states. So that is something that I worked on and encountered while I was running the Washington office. This president clearly does not have any care to comply with the Constitution. He clearly thinks that he is above the legislature. He uses executive order and regulation to circumvent the legislature. And there's another example that I want to give you real quick about what's going on in Washington before I move on, or something that I encountered. One of the things that really drove me nuts during this last campaign was that the Obama campaign was able to convince Americans that the Republican Party is for the wealthy and that Barack Obama was for the middle class. And I like to give an example of how that just wasn't true. This man just says one thing, but they have something else completely going on behind the scenes through the regulatory environment and through legislation. The Healthy Kids Act was reauthorized in the last lame duck session where the Democrats had control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And this is the free and reduced lunch program as part of this act, this bill. In the free and reduced lunch program, they actually put a floor ceiling which requires every school district to charge no less than $2.50 for school lunch. Well, I was talking to a school board member in West Virginia, and he said we were charging $1.60 for school lunch. $1.60. And he said the food was good, the kids were eating it. Now, if you're a poor family and you're receiving that lunch for free, it doesn't impact you that you're now paying 90 cents more for lunch. And if you're wealthy, you can probably absorb the additional cost. But if you're a middle-class family, 90 cents a day per child, per lunch, is hundreds of extra dollars out of your budget. That hit the middle class. And so, of course, during the debates, I was yelling all of this at the TV screen, and unfortunately, Governor Romney didn't hear me and wasn't able to talk about it. But those are the kinds of things that we need to learn to talk about. We need to learn to understand what's really going on and how, when this president says one thing, he's doing something completely different. And the last example I'll give you is school choice. In the Race to the Top grant program, the states that were applying for grants were required to have a plan for public charter schools. Required to. That gave a face, we support public charter schools. However, the IRS is looking to promulgate a regulation that forbids public charter school employees from from participating in their state retirement system. 42 states have in their statutes that their public school teachers, administrators will receive their retirement benefits through their state retirement system. In Virginia, most of our teachers, our public school teachers and administrators are in the Virginia retirement system. In Fairfax County, they have their own retirement system. So what that means is no one would work for a public charter school because they would have no retirement benefits. And that's how he's undermining public charter schools through this regulation while pretending he supports them by requiring it to, making a requirement race to the top. And that's just one of many examples of how he says one thing and he does something completely different, undermining what he says he supports through the regulatory system. So I think I've given you several instances of what is going on in Washington that we were working so hard to try and overturn, if you will. It was quite a challenging job. Well, what I'd like to do is to explain or to describe what the Lieutenant Governor's role is in the statute. The first, of course, is to preside over the state Senate. And I will tell you that I think any 7 of us, if having to split a tie vote, will vote with the Republicans. I think that goes without saying. The second obligation in the statute is that if something should happen to the governor and the governor is not able to fulfill his responsibilities, the Lieutenant Governor rises up to be the governor. And so one of the things that I think distinguishes me from the other 6 candidates, and I know there are a lot of us, and it's hard for many people to determine who they're going to support or what the differences are, and so I like to point out the 2 real differences I think that distinguish me from the rest is this. I am the only candidate for Lieutenant Governor who has served in the legislature, including in a leadership position. I am the only candidate for Lieutenant Governor who has served in the executive branch in the governor's cabinet. Governor McDonald has cabinet meetings every Monday morning. He requires a cabinet report every Friday afternoon that we all have to read. And I'm the only person running for Lieutenant Governor who I believe can step right into that role if I need to, because I have been a part of the governor's office. I understand how it functions. I understand what every department and agency are doing, how they interconnect with each other. But even more importantly, I've run the Washington office for 3 years, and I'm the only candidate for Lieutenant Governor who understands what's going on federally, how that impacts the state, not in a broad sense, but in a very narrow sense, as I had to work with each of my cabinet secretaries in each of their departments on issues that were related to what the feds were doing, whether it be in the administration or in Congress. And so I think I bring a breadth and a broadness of experience that none of the other candidates do. And I'll tell you the reason I'm running for Lieutenant Governor is because I feel that after 15 years of experience working in the legislature, serving in the leadership, serving in the governor's cabinet, and really understanding how the executive branch runs, and running the Washington office and really understanding policy and how the federal policy impacts states, I feel that I'm finally prepared to take on this awesome responsibility. And I know we have a couple of candidates who have never served in public office before. We have a couple that have served in Board of Supervisors. We have a couple who have been in the legislature. And they're all great people and dear friends of mine. But I think this is a very important and serious role for lieutenant governor, particularly when you know that that person has to stand ready to move up if they need to. And so I believe that that sets me apart from the others. The other thing that I want to talk about is electability. I don't know about you, but I'm really tired of working hard and losing elections. And the reason that we lost the election this year is very simple. You have to win 46% of the vote or better in Northern Virginia in order to win statewide. And we have seen that the past few elections, and that was exemplified in this last election. We lost Fairfax County. Romney lost Fairfax County by 120,000 votes. We lost Northern Virginia by 200,000 votes. And Governor Allen's numbers were worse than Governor Romney's numbers. So we went back and looked at why we had the outcome we did. And unfortunately, there were many localities outside of Northern Virginia who performed better in 2012 than 2008. The challenge is there are not enough votes in the rest of Virginia to overcome that kind of a loss in Northern Virginia, and that's a simple fact. Northern Virginia is determining the outcome of our statewide elections. Now, when we went to look to see why we had that outcome, it was that we did miserably with the ethnic voters, and we did worse with Asians than Hispanics, which really surprised us, because typically our Korean and Vietnamese voters are Republican conservative voters. We did very poorly with women voters, and we did very poorly with the youth. Now, my husband is former Congressman Tom Davis, and Tom and I have spent the last 15, even longer than that, years working with our ethnic community. We have a trusted relationship with them, and I'm very proud to say that every Republican ethnic leader in Northern Virginia is on board my campaign. And not only are they supporting my campaign, we have already collected almost 400 filing forms from ethnic voters who are going to come to the convention in May. And this is important for this reason. If we do not recapture the Asian vote and the Hispanic vote that we have lost, we will never win an election in Virginia again. They are too large of a voting bloc. In Prince William, it's a majority-minority locality already, and Fairfax will be soon. The minority voters really have a strong and loud voice, a large voice in the outcome of the elections up there. Now, this is what I found out. When I was traveling around the Commonwealth in November, I did a press tour. And when I returned back to Northern Virginia, I went to El Tiempo Latino, and I went to the Korea Times to talk with them. I have always treated our ethnic press as mainstream press, because those who are citizens and vote still read those ethnic newspapers every day, and they listen to their ethnic radio stations every day. And this is what they told me. They told me that the Obama and the Kane campaigns advertised in their papers every single day. They told me that they reached out to the Romney and Allen campaigns and were turned away. They didn't advertise at all. And so if you are a new voter and you don't really know the difference between the parties, and you see Obama, Kane, Obama, Kane, Obama, Kane every single day, and you never see Romney, Allen, if you're listening to the radio station and you're hearing Obama and Kane on your radio station, and you're never hearing Romney or Allen, who are you going to vote for? Our party didn't reach out at all. Now, Tom and I have been going to events, Pan-American events, Korean events, Vietnamese events, you name it. We've been doing it for years, and we built a trusted relationship with these communities. And so the reason that we were able to win was because they voted for us. And let me tell you how important that was to me. My district that I represented had a 17-point Democrat generic, and what that means is only 25% of my constituents were Republicans, 25%. But I managed to win 4 times, twice with 60% of the vote. And I didn't do it by being liberal. I have a 100% pro-life voting record, and I voted for the marriage amendment, which failed in my district. I didn't compromise my conservative principles, but I managed to be elected over and over again, sometimes by double-digit differences, because the ethnic voters were there for me. The women voters were there for me. I didn't compromise where I was on life or marriage, but I was able to win that vote. You have to be able to win independent vote as well. I would say if you did party registration in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, you'd probably see 25% Republican, 25% or so Democrat, and everybody else would register as an independent. And their vote swings. We see that up there. Bob McDonnell won Fairfax County. Romney lost Fairfax County by a very large margin. And so I think electability is very important. And I am also running because in looking at those that are running also for Lieutenant Governor, I know that I brought him the ticket for Ken, that I do well in Fairfax County, and you can't win if you can't do well enough in Fairfax County. And I believe that I will be Ken's greatest asset on the ticket, because I will help him bring in the ethnic vote and some women vote that we have been losing so badly up there that we lost this last election by a fairly large margin. So electability and experience, I think, are the two things that differentiate me from the other 6 candidates for Lieutenant Governor. I think that I still have like 17 minutes. I want to cover one more issue because I know that it's been coming up about me, and I like to direct it head on, or address it head on, and that's the Second Amendment. I'm aware there's a very ugly website that's out there about me, and mail has been coming, and I'm sure you'll see more. And so I always like to, and I think the sheet was passed out. I hope it was anyway. Steve, Steve's going to do that. Which is actually a copy of an email that I sent out to 40-some thousand people that are on my email list, and that is this. I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm actually a gun owner, 357 Magnum, and I've had a Beretta. And I always love to tell the story. My daughter's father was out of town a lot. And so there I was with my 4 girls when they were little. And we had a house alarm. The girls' bedrooms were upstairs, and we had a 2-story home, and my bedroom was downstairs. And one night the alarm goes off, and I look at the little panel in the bedroom, and it says, back door. And I'm like, oh great, someone has broken into the house. So the first thing I did was go to my safe, pull out the Beretta, and look for the perpetrator. Because as I like to say, no one gets between a mama grizzly and her cubs. And by golly, that wasn't going to happen that night. Now, fortunately, it was a false alarm, but certainly you're not a gun owner, and you don't believe in the castle doctrine, and you don't use that gun for protection if you don't support the Second Amendment. The one thing that I do believe is that we should have instant background checks at gun shows, and there are some who don't agree with that and are really working hard against me, but they're misrepresenting my entire record. I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I think that in light of what happened in Newtown, Connecticut, you just look at the fact that they have the 4th strictest set of gun control measures in the nation, and that tragedy happened there. Colorado has very strict gun control measures, and Aurora happened there. Gun control clearly is not going to prevent these from happening. I think we have other issues that we need to address, whether it's mental health or better security in schools and all of that, and that's something we need to address and make progress on. But clearly gun control isn't going to solve this issue. So I just wanted to clarify that that is where I am on that issue. And as far as instant background checks, the Virginia State Police just released some statistics. And the statistics are this. Since the instant background check has come into play, about 52,000 people have been turned away from being able to purchase a firearm because they failed the instant background check. Of those people, 13,000 were prosecuted and convicted of a felony for attempting to purchase a firearm when they were either convicted felon, mostly convicted felon. The healthcare information has come on later. Since Virginia Tech, the General Assembly passed legislation forbidding anyone who has been institutionalized in a mental health facility from being able to purchase a firearm. And all of that information has been put on the instant background check database. Last year, in 2012, 340 individuals attempted to buy a firearm from a dealer, and this is at the dealer shops, at gun shows, and at other venues. They were turned away from being allowed to buy a handgun because they failed the background check due to mental health incompetency. So it is working, and I think it's very important that we make sure that those in our statute who are not allowed to purchase a handgun can't. And when you look at those state police numbers, you see the magnitude of people who are attempting to purchase who do not have the right to own a gun or to purchase a gun. So I think that's very important, and I think in a gun show that's widely advertised, the state police are there. Those that purchase from a dealer are required to do that instant check. Those who buy from a private seller on those grounds is not, and I just think everyone should be treated the same way at a gun show. And that's as far as I go on that issue. So I wanted to clarify for that for everyone. It has nothing to do with registration. It's not universal instant background checks, but I think at gun shows it's important. And so I think I'll just stop there. We've left 15 or so minutes for questions, and if anyone has any questions for me, I'd be very happy to answer them.